It's a lot to live up to. But here I am, 6 million years out of Africa, 23 years out of my mother's womb, and about 10 years of hearkening back to my very much Neanderthal roots, living as a nomad. So my story of place, my story of leaving, my legacy of leaving, started when I left home when I was 12 years old. And through some combination of good luck and a shared affinity for Ann Taylor suits, the first place that I went from there was into the home of a middle school science teacher that I had who put her job on the line to make sure that I had a place to go. She may have had a lot of space in her heart. She did not, however, have a lot of space in her house. So I pulled a bit of a Harry Potter, and for a while I stayed in an alcove above her stairs. And I remember that she painstakingly sewed this curtain for me so that I would have a little privacy. And it had like gold lame on it, and it was just exactly what you want at that point in your life, for privacy anyway. So from there, when I was 16, shortly after I'd gotten emancipated, one of the first serious jobs that I had was that I worked innkeeping at an inn for a summer, and of course the exchange being that I could live there. And this place boasted this incredible carriage house, and it also happened to be extremely haunted, which nobody told me about. But nonetheless, I stayed. And so there I was, living in the carriage house, cleaning rooms, earning my keep, being a good little worker bee. And then the woman who owned the inn said, "My son is really sick. He's living in Nova Scotia. I've got to go. So can you like run the place?" And I was like, cool, yeah, sure, totally. And so she left, and she was actually gone for several weeks. And so I lived there, and I got up in the morning and made breakfast and cleaned the rooms every afternoon. And the people who met me during that time knew me as a 20-year-old art history major from Middlebury. And if you're in the audience now and you stayed there, I am so sorry I lied to you, but I bet that was one of the best breakfasts you ever had. After that, when the summer ended and I was sort of approaching my junior year of high school, there was a period of transition where I was actually, at the end of that summer, living in my car. And I had this Ford Taurus. It was red. I named it Harrison because it was a Ford. And God, I loved that car. When I had to part with that car, I cried like I was losing family. And so for the weeks that I was there and I was lying there and looking up through the moonroof at the stars and feeling so much a part of a community, I really, really heavily ruminated on the concept of it takes a village to raise a child. From there, I went to the next place, which was a little apartment in the house of an absolutely brilliant biologist who was as sound of heart as she was of mind. She and I would sit at her kitchen table with an endless pot of tea, and we would get all of the leaves that we had found outside, and we would sit there and identify them one by one for hours. And then after that, I stayed with a woman who was a retired, well, I don't want to say retired because I don't think one can ever actually retire from being an actor. And this woman is proof of that. She was in her late 50s. She wasn't acting on stage per se anymore, but she was still very much an actress. And the image that I have in her of my mind, that to this day I can still totally envision her, I can hear her, I can smell the smell of her basic ultralights. She would stand out on the back porch of her house just as the light was changing in the evening, and I can see her, and in her long, elegant fingers, she would be holding this cigarette, and she would turn to me just as the light had changed, and she would go, "Princess, don't you just love the pink light?" After that, I moved to New York City. I had graduated high school. I was going there to be a dancer. And I lived in an apartment in Yonkers with 2 other girls and 3 boys. And the 2 years that I spent there were the best years of my life. But after the first 2 years, I got sick. And I was in the hospital. And I was at this college, this very prestigious college, on a full scholarship that was contingent upon my academics. And I was sick, and I couldn't go to class. And the dean of students and I had a conversation, and I remember them saying to me, in order for you to recuperate, you've got to go home. And I remember looking at them and going, I am home. Where am I gonna go? So I came back here. And for a while, I kind of bounced around a little bit. I was very fortunate during this time to have the love and affection of my aunt, who is sitting right there. She's still supporting me. She's here right now. I also had a string of apartments, as young women often do. And then I met a guy, and then this guy and I had a string of apartments. But for a while during that time, home was not a place. It was a person. It was the feeling of his toes in the bed next to mine at night. And during the recovery from a surgery that I had, it was the sound of his mother downstairs in the kitchen singing when she thought nobody could hear her. And first thing in the morning, it was the sound of his father very soulfully playing an upright bass at 5:30 in the morning. But for a while, those things were home. And then that relationship ended. And I found myself alone again. And in the light of that failed relationship, I started thinking about all the other failed relationships with men I've had in my life. And I thought about a boyfriend I had in high school. He was my first serious boyfriend. He was a Canadian expat with dreadlocks and this denim vest onto which he sewed Metallica patches. And he chain smoked American spirits, and he was so cool. And we were really cool. And we would sit in his dimly lit apartment and we would chain smoke and talk about life. And I remember I was telling him this story that I'm telling you. I was telling him about my sort of nomadic life, my life on the road. And I remember him saying to me one night, "You're like this bird, you know? I know about this bird. They're called the sooty tern. And this bird, they fly. They fly for years nonstop. Might be 5, 7, 10 years, they just fly. And yeah, sure, for a while they might kind of plop down on the ocean and just kind of float, but then they'll pick their wings back up again and they will keep flying. And they are not on land for decades at a time." And I remember hearing that and going, God, it sounds kind of awful, but I think he's kind of right. I mean, that's really what I've been doing. I've really been flying nonstop for years. And then I got really worried about this bird. I was like, well, what happens to them? Did they just drop out of the sky one day dead? Is that what I'm going towards in my life? And I remember him being like, no, you don't get it, because then something amazing happens. Even though these birds have traveled for thousands of miles, they have flown nonstop for 10 years. They get halfway around the world and something shifts. There's this primal shift inside of them. It's an unparalleled homing instinct. And so then after a decade or so, this little thing in them switches and they just go, whoop, it's time to go home. And they can get home. Wherever home is, they find it. They might be halfway across the world from where they started, but they can get home. And so I was thinking about that boyfriend, and I was thinking about myself, and I was thinking about my 10 years of flying, and then I thought, I can feel it. I can feel that unparalleled homing instinct in myself. And I'm ready. I'm ready to find home. Thank you.